warm welcome along to the Racing Post's preview of Euro 2024, brought to you in association with Free Super Tips, your daily home for football hackers and bet builders. And I'm delighted to say that alongside myself, Warren Ashurst, today we've got Mark Langdon, expert tipster from the Racing Post, experienced Racing Post sports journalist James Milton, and esteemed journalist and author Jonathan Wilson. And guys, it seems like it's been quite some time since we've actually had a summer tournament, bearing in mind we had a Winter World Cup before. Firstly, Jonathan, how much are you looking forward to this? It seems to be heightening the mood a little bit.
Yeah, I think the fact that it is a summer tournament, the fact that it's not going to be like the last summer tournament in that this is all in one country, the fact it's a country that's manageable by train, it feels like the old style tournaments. It feels like the tournaments I've most enjoyed covering, which have been Portugal 2004, Austria, Switzerland 2008, that you can just hop on a train and Deutsche Bahn permitting, and I know there's been some problems there. You should be able to get about and see quite a lot of football and see quite a lot of the country. And
James, we've got two British hopes, of course, going into this time around. It always seems to add to the excitement a little bit. England regulars, of course, but Scotland as well, and I think that probably will get everybody more involved in the competition.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember kind of early in my betting and journalism career, you know, England would be kind of backed and there'd be the patriotic punt and whatever, and you'd be like, yeah, but they're not going to win, are they? This time, I think they've earned their place as favourites, and it'll be fascinating to see if they can deliver on that.
And Mark, I don't think anybody really expects Scotland to go and challenge for the trophy this year, but the fact that their fans are there and the stadiums that they have in Germany and the atmosphere is likely to make it that little bit better.
Yeah, I think so, because they qualified for the last Euros, but it was impacted by how many fans could actually travel and go to watch the games. The fact that they were moving around in different places, it didn't feel, as Jonathan was saying, like an actual kind of tournament really, whereas this one, we know that the Tartan Army are travelling in huge numbers over to Germany. I think you have a look at that and it's all the same. I was reading that Denmark are taking 50,000-60,000. You've got Netherlands that obviously enjoy their trips usually to sort of Germany in terms of won the Euros there previously. So I think a lot of those kind of big footballing nations are really going to enjoy this tournament, and the stadiums are good, the transport's good. The weather looks a bit dodgy early on. Jonathan, I don't know if you've packed your sort of jumpers and trousers. It looks it looks a bit cold in the early part, but that might actually help the football. So I think it should be an exciting tournament in terms of the fact that there's no absolute standout team. I don't think we're probably all going to have different selections in terms of who's going to win it. And I think you just have to accept that international football is not as good as club football. And once you kind of just accept that moment and just enjoy that there will be moments, like if you look back to the World Cup, it wasn't necessarily about this great football, but there were moments in the tournament that you remember forever. And I think that is kind of the difference maybe between club football and international football.
I think like equality almost is a benefit, paradoxically, that it's not incredibly sophisticated, that there is more opportunity for individuals to shine, that it's not these systems that have been put together over years with huge amounts of data, that there is something slightly more random, slightly more unpredictable about it. That's what... Yeah, I went through a long phase of thinking international football was a bit rubbish. I've completely come back around to it and I prefer it.
I mean, I suppose we're obviously going to be focusing on football, but the economy is going to get a big boost across Europe as well. But I think that's probably for another debate. Let's look at the outright markets then in terms of who the bookmakers feel will be challenging for the trophy come the end of the tournament. England around about 3-1 at the top of the market. France 4-1. Germany, the hosts, 11-2. Portugal around 8-1. Spain 9-1. 18-1 Italy and the Netherlands, and around about 20-1 for Belgium. Scotland are as big as 150-1. Jonathan, let's start with you in terms of who you're thinking are going to go a long way and deep in this tournament.
Well, I think England and France have the best two squads. I've got slight concerns about certain elements of both sides, which we'll come on to later when we go through the groups. And so purely for that reason, I think Germany, the fact they're coming into form at the right time, that Nagelsmann has got them with some momentum. The 2 wins they've had in the last year over France, I think, are hugely significant. I think Toni Kroos coming back in gives a better balanced midfield. Kimmich, right back, the balance is there again. I slightly worry about scoring goals for them, whether Havertz or Füllkrug have got enough. But on home soil, we saw how they were elevated by that in 2006. I'd just about go Germany.
It can be a huge lift, can't it, playing on home soil? And the fact that Germany's pedigree coupled with that surely makes them one of the teams to beat.
Yeah, I mean, home advantage I think is less significant than it used to be, and I think if you look at the history of international tournaments, home winners were much more common in the past. Partly that's because a wide array of countries are hosting tournaments now. But I don't think it's as big an advantage for Germany as it was, say, in the World Cup in '74. But still, it clearly helps if the country does get behind them. And I know Germany does have a slight issue of club versus national team. That's a bigger divide there in a lot of places. Yeah. But still, the sense of a whole nation behind you, I think, can be a huge benefit.
So Jonathan thinks Germany could be the team to beat. James, who are you looking at in terms of an outright winner?
I think the two for me are France and Portugal. You know, at the prices, I just think, you know, England, everyone knows what a talented squad they have. I think they are going to go close. You're just concerned that, you know, it's a bit lopsided. I don't think there's anything Gareth Southgate could have done about it. You know, they just have some fantastic attacking players and not so many good defensive players. So I don't, and you know, if it does go wrong, I don't think we're going to be looking back and saying, oh, he should have taken James Maddison and Jack Grealish. I mean, I think they you know, he's got a terrific squad there, but just at the prices, I'm not sure why France are a little bit bigger than them. You know, you mentioned pedigree with Germany. France obviously won the World Cup in 2018, so close last time as well, and you know, they just have this incredible kind of talent coming through, and obviously they've got the superstar Mbappe, who is, as Mark said, you know, in these international games when, you know, like with Germany, I mean, they've kind of warmed up they changed their manager last year, just have a kind of handful of friendlies to work on, so it is going to be a little bit ragged sometimes, and when you've got a player like Mbappe on your side, as he showed in the World Cup final when, you know, France didn't turn up for 80 minutes and still almost won the trophy. So I think he's key there. And with Portugal, again, just looking at their squad, you know, it's really not that far behind England and France, and they're kind of twice the price. Probably slight doubts over Roberto Martinez is a factor in that. And obviously the kind of Cristiano Ronaldo question, which is fascinating. He was obviously dropped for that amazing 6-1 win over Switzerland at the World Cup, but steadfastly refuses to retire from international football. Probably Messi's performance at the World Cup may have something to do with that. So that'll be really interesting. But their squad, particularly in midfield, it looks exceptional.
Whereas in Mark, the World Cup has kind of been the usual suspects over recent times. We've seen shocks in the European Championships, thinking particularly of Denmark and Greece in the past. Is there a chance that, you know, we could be looking outside of those big main betting options? Yeah,
well, I definitely think that you do get surprise sort of winners, obviously in the Euros. We've had them, even when Portugal won in 2016, they weren't fancied at all. They were over 20-1 the year that they won it, and you've had a lot of semi-finalists. Denmark last time. I remember when Turkey and Croatia reached semi-final. So it's not like you can't do it. You know, you only need to get hot for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden you're in a sort of quarterfinals. Of the dark horses, I'd probably give a shout out to Ukraine as a team that I think sort of in that sort of 100-1 kind of area. I think Ukraine are the ones that interest me the most. You've got somebody like Lunin in goal that has played very well for Real Madrid this season. Striker up front, won the La Liga Golden Boot. There's quality in midfield as well. So I think they'd probably be, they're the dark horses. I'm labelling it, they're the official dark horses of the Euros.
But you have a fancy for Portugal as well, don't you?
I do, yeah. I think that balance is important in international football. Quite often, there's nothing you can really do about it. If you get a load of good attackers, or you get a load of, you know, sometimes you get these nations that have got 3 good goalkeepers and no centre forwards. Whereas I think that Portugal have got kind of a nice balance throughout their team. I think you look at Bernardo Silva and Bruno Fernandes in the midfield, the goal scoring options of somebody like Jota, who, you know, almost a forgotten man because he hasn't been playing as much this season. I think Leao is somebody on the counter-attack, maybe off the bench is somebody that can cause big damage. Cristiano Ronaldo's influence on the team is probably my biggest concern, because if he doesn't start scoring, he'll still want to play. How does that affect the dynamic? I just go back to what James was saying, though, about Roberto Martinez, because I do have those fears about him. Yeah. But then I looked at what he did with Belgium, and last time I don't think their team was good enough at the World Cup. But if you go back to the last sort of 2 tournaments before that, when he had a really good Belgian side, I don't think he did much wrong in those tournaments. They won the group on both occasions. They ended up in the wrong half of the draw both times. They beat Brazil and then lost to France in a really tight semi-final. And then in the Euro, they beat Portugal and then lost an equally tight game to Italy, who went on, like France did, to win the tournament. So I wouldn't want him managing my club necessarily, but I think in international football, the standard of coaching probably isn't as high anyway.
Okay, so the 3 names that are standing out at the moment, Germany, Portugal and France. We're going to have a look now through at the different groups and how they might fare in the group stage. And we'll start off, of course, in chronological order with Group A, which sees Germany, Switzerland, Hungary and Scotland battling it out. Germany around about 2-5 favourites to come out on top in Group A, with Switzerland 11-2, Hungary around 9-1 and Scotland 11-1. Jonathan, I know that you mentioned Germany already, but I know that you've got a bit of interest in terms of Hungary as well. How do you see them faring in this group?
I think it's really fascinating because until they lost in Ireland, which was a bit of a freak result if you watch that game, although I think it did expose a potential problem they have. But they'd gone, 12 games unbeaten, 13 games unbeaten. Their improvement, I mean, it's since Orbán took power in 2010, his second term. But they've pumped an enormous amount of money into football. They've developed, I think it's 40 stadiums they've refurbished. I think it's something like over 4,000 pitches. They're trying to increase participation, and it's clearly having an effect. Now, you can argue whether that money could be better spent in other ways, and that's for somebody who wants to talk about Hungarian politics. But whatever you think of Orbán, the policy he's taken to football has clearly worked. Their league has risen through the rankings from, I think, 32nd to 23rd in that 13-14 year period, which isn't huge, but it's significant. They are getting better, and I think they've got a really interesting coach in Marco Rossi. He's a relationist, which I don't know how aware people are of this divide now between positionism and relationism. But essentially the idea is in positionism you have set positions and your players stay fairly rigid in that structure. Relationism is much freer. And I think from an attacking point of view that can be hugely beneficial. I think you've seen that with Hungary. I think it works really nicely with Szoboszlai and Szollai playing just behind Varga. I think that front three, I mean Varga's maybe not quite of the quality of the other two, but that front three works very nicely together. But I do think that does mean there is often space behind them, and that's what Ireland exploited. And you sort of think if John O'Shea's Ireland can exploit that, then Germany probably can. And I think for them, the key is that first game they've got against Switzerland, that I think whoever comes out on top of that has a great chance of finishing second in the group.
Germany, obviously favourites. James going into the group, understandably. Opening game with Scotland. Can you see anybody else challenging them for top spot, or is it going to be Germany all the way?
It's difficult. I mean, some of these groups, you wouldn't want to be having a lumpy single on Germany at the odds, but obviously there'd be ones to consider in a kind of group stage ACCA. They have obviously didn't need to qualify, so they have just been having non-competitive games. I mean, their squad looks fantastic, and obviously a very, very exciting coach as well. But I think they will finish top, but it's very tight in behind them. I think the betting suggests that. There's not much between Switzerland and Hungary, and Scotland, I feel, probably just peaked a bit early in qualifying, didn't they? With the famous win against Spain, that was back in March 2023, and they've had a bit of a kind of lean run since then, against playing friendlies against some good sides. Beat Gibraltar to end that not in entirely convincing fashion. Well, Wales couldn't do it. That is true. And obviously the injuries. Lyndon Dykes now injured and missing Lewis Ferguson, who was Serie A midfielder of the year, which is a fantastic accolade. So I think as Jonathan says, I think Hungary have been mixing it in some good company, and at the last Euros when they gave Germany a real scare, and then at the Nations League as well when they played very well against England and Germany. So I think the Germany-Hungary straight forecaster for me appeals in this one.
We'll talk more about the group overall with you, Mark, in a second, but just a quick word on Scotland, because as James has alluded to there, the injuries are brutal for Steve Clarke, really, aren't they? I mean, they've still got some quality in there when you look at John McGinn and Kieran Tierney and Andy Robertson and Scott McTominay. They're all Premier League players, but to lose the amount of talent attacking-wise that they have is a huge blow.
Yeah, it is. And I think with all of the kind of nations outside of the obvious ones, once you get some injuries, that's when it really begins to tell. Because I think Scotland can put out a strong 11, and they've been able to do that. And I think Clark has been able to generate a very positive atmosphere within the squad. But that's sort of only takes you so far. And at some stage you need to be able to score goals to win games. And I think their problem comes in that sort of final third. They are going to need a McTominay or McGinn probably to kind of chip in with goals from midfield. And you look at sort of other nations around similar kind of ranking to them, and they've maybe got a bit more up front, I would say. And you might be able to draw your way through to the last 16. I mean, Portugal have done that before, but you really want 4 points out of the group stage, at least 3. And you're asking Scotland to be able to beat one of those 3 teams. And I'm looking at it going, I'm not sure I fancy them to win any of those games.
So in terms of Group A overall, I mean, when we've seen Switzerland in the past in tournaments, they've been a similar scenario where they haven't necessarily got a lot of goals in them as a squad, but they've been able to defend strongly and pick up useful points. But is that, as you say, going to be enough? Is it for you, Germany and Hungary, or do you think there'll be another team?
I think probably, I'm struggling to split Hungary and Switzerland maybe for second spot, so you have to close your ears now, Tartan Army. I'm going to go for Scotland not to qualify from this group. I hear what you're saying about Switzerland, but they have still got players that have played at a reasonably high level in that final third. I'm not sure I necessarily trust all of them to deliver, but Xhaka's coming off a very good season. You've got Kanji that plays for Manchester City, Sommer that plays for Inter. I mean, these are players of a higher standing than I would say than
Champions
Scotland.
League level.
Yeah,
as well.
exactly. So I'm going to go for. Sorry to say this, but I'm going to go for Scotland not to qualify as my best bet.
Which would be a real shame, of course, for all the Tartan Army who are going over there, but I'm sure they'll give it a real go in terms of Group A, and we'll look to Group B next. Okay, we're moving on now to Group B at Euro 2024, and this sees Spain, Italy, Croatia and Albania battle it out. In terms of the odds, well, Spain are the strong favourites at around about 5-6. Italy around 2-1. It's 9-2 Croatia, and you can get as big as 30-1 for Albania. You're going to be looking forward to seeing Albania in action, Jonathan, if that's the right expression, against Croatia in Group B. What can you tell us about Albania and what we can expect?
Well, one of the fascinating things about this tournament as a whole is that 11 of the 24 are from the former communist bloc, plus Germany, obviously half from the former communist bloc. And I think only 2 players in the squad actually were born in the East. And so I had a look at, is there any reason why we're suddenly seeing 11? I think it was 8 at the last tournament, 8 at the one before that, and significantly fewer when it was 16 teams. And partly it's just the expanded format means there's more scope for Eastern European teams to get in. And so I went, and you look at Hungary, big investment, Serbia have been investing, Georgia have been investing. I looked at Albania, there's no investment. I think Albania's qualification's a bit of a freak, to be honest. They won 1 of 11 games in 2022. Then Silvino came in, your former Arsenal fullback. And you've got to give them credit, because they then went on an 8-game unbeaten run, despite having a lot of injuries. People like Broja, who we might have heard of in the Premier League, were not there. He promoted a load of players who were not well known. And so you think, oh, well, he's found something. And then you look at the squad and he's dropped 3 of his regulars. There's no real explanation for it. He's been very sort of vague about why he's done that. I think what you would say about him, he's popular within Albania. He lives in Tirana, works for Pablo Zabaleta. Zabaleta's still living in Spain. But Silvino himself is there. So maybe he is watching Albanian league games and picking something up. But I think that when you look in detail that 8-game unbeaten run, there's some slightly fortunate results there. So I have to say I don't fancy Albania at all.
So my eyes lighting up at 30-1 was probably not the best
There's
idea.
a reason the 30-1 I would suggest.
Yeah, I think you're probably right on that front. Spain are obviously the strong favourites at the moment. Italy are the reigning champions, James, but I've got a feeling that you don't think they're going to do very well this time around.
I think it's a fascinating group. It just looks like one when you're filling in your kind of correct score predictions. I think I'm going to be having a lot of 1-alls and 0-0s and things. I just think it's going to be a tight, trappy section, and I don't think that is going to work out for an Italy side who are still kind of finding their feet under Luciano Spalletti, who had that magnificent season with Napoli. But just one stat that caught my eye. Obviously, Italy were in England's qualifying group and lost to them at home and away. They used 40 players in 8 qualifiers, which just suggests a side kind of scrambling around and obviously changing managers, less than a year before the finals as well. Jonathan's not filled me with great confidence about Albania, but Italy not to qualify at sort of 5-1 might be where, because I think what you're going to get from Spain and Croatia a little bit more than Italy. All these three were actually at the Nations League finals last summer. Spain beat Croatia on penalties after I think it was a goalless final. For once, I'm not sure. I was probably watching a T20 Blast game or something at that time of year. But yeah, Croatia for once actually not winning on penalties after a dour 120 minutes. But I think Spain and Croatia, the dual forecast looks a solid bet, and like I said, Italy not to qualify at around 5-1. I think the wheels could just come off here.
Spain and Croatia, if you were looking for potentially the ideal mix, Mark, of squad ages, you've got veterans who have been there, done it before, and you've also got younger players coming through. You could argue that both of those two tick that box.
Well, I'd say Croatia might be over the hill in some aspects of the side. I mean, Modric still does well for Real Madrid, but usually in 20-minute spells. Can he kind of take that team forward and still drive them forward? You've got Brozovic as well, Kovacic in that sort of midfield that just feels like it's been around forever. Garvidol at the back is somebody that's obviously come on a lot, but I don't know if I feel like I've said this for about 10 years, but it might be a tournament too far for Croatia in terms of having a real go at reaching the latter stages. I think they'll be awkward in the group. In terms of Spain, I do agree that they're an interesting team to me, because I think back to the last Euros, they played probably the best football and were unlucky to go out to Italy in those semi-finals. They then lost on penalties again though, and I think if you back Spain, you're probably going to need them to win a penalty shootout at some stage in terms of actually going on to win the tournament, because they just don't score enough goals. A lot of it is possession for possession's sake. Morata doesn't fill me with confidence that he's that person. They have got sort of pace out wide. You've got quality in midfield with someone like Pedri as well. I mean, we all know about the quality of Rodri, but I just feel like somebody will beat them along the way. And so I do like them in this group. I think that they're the standout team, but maybe not to go all the way and win it.
There's very few teams that have a worse penalty shootout record than England, but I think if Spain gets to the knockout stages, there'll be quite a few teams trying to take them to extra time and penalties. If we're picking out one bet then for Group B, Jonathan, we'll start with you. What would you select?
I think I'd probably go Spain to top the group. I mean, I share Mark's concern about the lack of goals, but they don't lose. Nobody loses if Rodri's playing for them, unless Scott McTominay's on the other side. The last two games Rodri lost, Scott McTominay was there. So unless Scotland get through, Spain are going to be fine.
It's a simple game, isn't it? We complicate it.
But I think in the group, Italy, so many injuries to key players. They're looking at Scamacca or Retegui to be the centre forward. Croatia have got this really weird record. They've never won a knockout game at the Euros. I mean, obviously it doesn't matter for the group, but I think
they barely win them at World Cups and still get to the final, don't they?
I think it's going to be a bit like Belgium. We kept saying, the Belgian golden generation is... for 10 years we're saying it's a step too far for them. Surely this actually is, just like the last World Cup was a step too far for Belgian golden generation. Albania, made my feelings clear. So I think Spain atop the group is the only thing I feel sort of comfortable with or confident about.
Yeah. James, what would you go with?
The Spain-Croatia dual forecast. So yes, and by implication, Italy get to struggle.
Yeah. And Mark?
Yeah, I agree with Jonathan. I think that Spain are very worthy favourites in this group. It is the sort of labelled the group of death. I'm not sure it's quite as difficult as it looks on paper.
Okay, let's move on now to Group C, and of course England are in this group along with Denmark, Serbia and Slovenia, and England will be the strong favourites to progress from Group C, as of course they are in the outright market as well. Around about 2-5 for Gareth Southgate's men, 5-1 Denmark, 8-1 Serbia and 16-1 Slovenia. Let's start with England, Jonathan. The squad selection has been much talked about, as it often is, but were there any major surprises for you?
Not major. I think a mild surprise that Grealish didn't make it. I mean, Maguire obviously is an injury-based issue, and he seems to think that he might have been fit enough, but Southgate's taken that decision. But I sort of feel, and this happens with every England manager, but particularly when an England manager's been there a long time, that there's an element of trying to force these sort of meta-narratives upon them that, Southgate, he's too loyal, or Southgate, he's ruthless.
Yeah.
I think it's just nonsense. I think Southgate just makes a decision based on what he thinks is right. So he stuck with Maguire for ages because he feels he needs a big, strong bloke who can head the ball out. And Maguire is the best in England at doing that. He may have, he does have other flaws in his game, but at just winning headers, he's very good, and Southgate has felt that's important. So I'm sure had he been convinced by Maguire's fitness, he would have been there, he would have played. England have got a huge array of attacking talent, and so you've got the luxury of saying, well, if you haven't played much this season and you're not obviously in form, I'm sorry, but there's no space for you. And Maddison's found that and Grealish has found that.
Yeah, I was going to say they've probably been, because of their positions, it's kind of been forced upon him a little bit that he has to go with other options, because there's no way you could leave out a Foden or a Palmer instead.
No, I mean, if you want to take 7 of that type of player, I guess there's an argument whether you take the 3 centre forwards. I think that makes sense actually, because you only need one injury. If you take 2, one injury, and suddenly you're down to 1. And so if you want to chuck on a second centre forward late in a game, or if you had a slight issue, last tournament you had Rashford, so that sort of covered it. But there's nobody else who can really do that. So taking 3 centre forwards I think makes sense. So then you've got that line. So if you take Grealish, you've got to leave out. You're not going to leave out Palmer. No. Anthony Gordon, I guess, is the only one, but I think he gives you a directness. I think he gives you an aggression. I think he gives you a defensive capacity on the left. He can play at centre forward. He did it for the under-21s very successfully. So I think that makes sense. Eze started very, very well against Bosnia. So Grealish did fine coming off the bench, but Eze probably did better having started the game. So, I think Grealish has done okay at tournaments in the past, and I take the point that he's very good at winning free kicks, which can be useful late on. But I think Eze probably deserves it based on recent form. So, with all these things, I think Southgate has much more knowledge than us because he's seeing them in training. He's seeing them performing the tasks he's asking them to perform. And I think he's done enough over the last 8 years to deserve our confidence. Yep,
I'd go along with that. James, is there anything that sort of caught your eye in terms of the squad, ways that he's gone or hasn't gone, so to speak?
No, I mean, I think that's right, that, the narrative is so often that, he's stuck in his ways and he has his favourites and whatever, and then he'd rip that up, picked half the Crystal Palace team because they've been brilliant for the last 6 weeks of the season. And actually, it's great. The other thing is that these younger players who he's brought in, just in the March friendlies and obviously this month, they've all impressed. I mean, no one's kind of looked out of their depth, and so it does mean some good players are going to be left out. But I mean, if you're an England fan, I think that's what you want, isn't it? You're always in the build-up to these tournaments. You're looking at, this is France's third 11 or whatever. They'd probably win it as well. And I think England have left some fantastic players behind, but that can only be a good thing.
He's got a lot of big decisions to make, Mark. I mean, he has to work out how to utilise all of these attacking players.
Yeah, I think one of the impact, though, could be who has to play at left back. So if Luke Shaw's available, I think that does give you the option of playing Foden on the left, because he can then drift inside and Shaw can go sort of down the outside to sort of keep that width. If Shaw's not fit, and we're taking it on trust that he's going to be back at some stage, you've got Trippier or Gomez. I even saw somebody trying to suggest that Saka has played there in the past. I think that was a joke, but they can't do that job, and so if Foden plays left, everything's coming inside, and that would be a bigger concern. But I think, assuming Shaw is available at some stage, I wouldn't play sort of Bellingham and Foden together in central midfield anyway. I think it's just one too many. I mean, I mentioned it earlier, but balance is important in international tournaments. I don't think it's always about, let's get the best 11 players into the team and then work a system around that. England have it's cost them before, really, in trying to do that. So I'm pleased with most of the squad. I suppose at centre half, the Maguire replacement, Branthwaite is unlucky, I think, to not make the squad. The only thing I would say in defence of, say, Lewis Dunk is that if Branthwaite was playing centre half for Brighton, he probably would have looked the same way, because Everton play very deep, it's narrow, it's tight, and it makes the defenders probably stand out more than what it does if you're playing a team that wants to play out from their own goal line and then defend on the halfway line and actually encourage teams to try and nick the ball off of you. I think that that's maybe why Dunk hasn't looked as good, but I think they will miss Maguire's physical presence, and John Stones has just not been the John Stones of last year. So I am worried about that defence.
Jonathan, if we're thinking that England are good enough to win the group, I think we'd probably all pretty much agree with that. Denmark, Serbia and Slovenia looking to try and get at least second place. Is there any of those three that stand out for you?
I mean, I think they're all significantly poorer than England. I think all of them have issues. I think Denmark are probably the best of the three, but they haven't been in great form recently. They've struggled for goals. They lost to Kazakhstan. They lost to Northern Ireland. Even the game at home, they won against Northern Ireland. They were pretty fortunate. Northern Ireland had an equaliser ruled out after one of the longest VAR delays I've ever seen. So there's some problems in that Denmark squad. Serbia they've been okay under Dragan Stojkovic. I think they're a bit unlucky with the group they got at the World Cup. But that's the Serbian of the Yugoslav way. You get to a tournament and then you don't quite deliver. Slovenia, first tournament for 24 years, or first Euros for 24 years. Credit for getting there, but you look at that squad, there's nothing really there that scares you. Šeško obviously is a very good forward and somebody who's much in demand. Oblak in goal is clearly a very good keeper, but it'll be a solid 4-4-2 trying to get to Šeško, and if you can't deal with that, then you're not going to win a tournament.
I'm showing my age now because Dragan Stojkovic, I remember watching him as a player, unbelievable talent, fantastic player. I get the feeling that his kind of mindset as a player won't be the same necessarily as how Serbia play in this tournament, James.
Yeah, they're another of those. I mean, it is just a poisoned label, isn't it? The dark horses, and certainly they've had that over a couple of tournaments. I mean, that World Cup group was very entertaining. They blew a 3-1 lead against Cameroon, so that was costly. Just think the edge that they might have over Denmark and Slovenia is in goal scoring. Vlahovic and Mitrovic options up front, and that could be enough to get them a top two finish. Their odds against for that, it would be a small play, I think, but that looks decent for me. I mean, Denmark and Slovenia actually finished level on points in qualifying, so that's kind of, obviously Slovenia would have been a bit happier than the Danes with that, and I feel Denmark, obviously had a very disappointing World Cup campaign after doing brilliantly at the Euros, so possibly on a slightly downward trajectory there.
Yeah, Mark, you quite rightly flagged up Denmark for the last Euros, and they got all the way to the semi-finals on that occasion. Where are they now, do you think, compared to that?
I was about the only person in London gutted when they lost that semi-final. It was quite a weird experience. No, they're a much worse side now, I think. Eriksson, I know he missed most of that tournament, obviously, and I do wonder whether that the medical emergency kind of just brought everyone together, and they were kind of just playing on the kind of inspiration and kind of that feeling of kind of everyone together, which I think can actually work well in international tournaments. But he's not the same player now that he was sort of then. He can't influence games for 90 minutes anymore. I just look around at their team and I'd be quite negative about them, really. I think that you're asking a lot of Højlund really to score the goals, and he's a player of promise, but I don't know, as Man United have found out, I don't know if you want to rely on him, and United's best performance of the season came probably when they then sort of played without a striker. So I think you're asking a lot for somebody that young to come in and be your main goal scoring threat. And so for that reason, I was actually looking at Slovenia to qualify in this heat, because, as Jonathan said, they've got Šeško up front, they've got Oblak in goal, and Ilicic maybe off of the bench, as he's getting on now, but he's still a creative force. And I think Serbia are one of them teams, I've mentioned it before about balance. I think we get sucked in by the fact that they've got Mitrovic, Vlahovic, Tadic, Milenkovic, Savic, and nobody ever mentions that the defence isn't very good, and and the areas around that. And I'd much rather take a solid team than one that's kind of got a splattering of stars in all one position. So not a great betting heat, but I think I'll go for Slovenia to qualify.
Okay, so one outright pick again for this group. Jonathan, where would you go?
I would also go Slovenia to qualify, just on the basis that I don't trust Serbia at all, and Denmark I think are really, really faltering. So, third place can get you through. They only have to win one game, and they'll probably do. And I think they could nick a 1-0 quite easily.
James, what's your pick for Group C?
I'm going to stand up for Serbia. Serbia top 2 finish, but yes, tentative.
And Mark, are you going with Slovenia as your pick?
Yeah, I was looking at maybe Denmark not to qualify, but I don't trust Serbia that much, so I'll go for Slovenia to qualify.
Well, we'll move on now to Group D, which features France, the Netherlands, Austria and Poland. And not a major surprise to see at the head of the betting that France are 4-7 for Group D success. The Netherlands 11-4, Austria 8-1 and Poland 14-1 for Poland in Group D. Let's start with the French, Jonathan. Obviously, they got to the final in Qatar. Where are they, do you think, a couple of years on from that?
Look, I mean, they're obviously brilliant. The squad is exceptional. But I do have concerns about both the middle of defence and the middle of midfield. The balance doesn't seem quite right. Upamecano seems to me, as soon as he's put under pressure, he makes mistakes. He's fine in a game where his team dominates possession, where he can stroke it about, but you put him under pressure and I don't trust him. But they can play Konate and Saliba, so it's not really a big problem. I think it's interesting that Kante's come back into the side, or back into the squad at least. It's as if they need that experience to the back of midfield. I think that was a problem. The fact they lost 2 friendlies in the last year to Germany, they're only friendlies. France and the Deschamps have a habit of getting poor results in friendlies and occasionally in qualifiers. But in what was quite a difficult qualifying group with the Netherlands, with Greece, with Ireland, they were exceptional. I mean, they scored, They scored 29 goals, only conceded 3 in the 10 games. So they were incredibly dominant. I also have a slight issue with Mbappe, that for all his brilliance, for all his goal scoring, I do think he's a bit of a weakness because he just doesn't do a lot of work. And you saw in the World Cup that he and Kyle Walker essentially negated each other, and I wonder whether that is something that, in retrospect, Walker might have been. And I know that the first French goal came the first time Walker went forward. That is true, but I wonder if Walker could have put a bit more pressure on, could have called his bluff a bit. And you saw both in the semi and the final, Mbappe had to be moved into the middle because he wasn't picking up the right back, and so they brought on Thuram. So I think he does cause slight problems, but of course, his finishing is so good, his pace is so phenomenal that he can score a hat-trick from nowhere, as he did in the final. Yeah,
and clearly they're going to go with him as their main man and almost kind of build the team around him. James, in terms of the nearest challengers, the Netherlands have been on a steady incline over the last few years, certainly improvement. We know some of the names in the squad have done well at Premier League level. Are they quite at that level now where they can challenge somebody like France?
I think the outright betting is quite eloquent there, because there is a significant gulf, isn't there, between kind of the top 5 down to Spain, and then there's a big leap to the likes of Italy and the Netherlands and Belgium. And I think that's fair. The Dutch leave me a little bit cold at this tournament, I must admit. Jonathan mentioned they're in the same group in qualifying as France, and France beat them comfortably, 4-0 and 2-1. And Ronald Koeman seems to be quite an unimaginative appointment there. There seems to be a rule that only about 4 different people can ever manage the Netherlands, and they're just
it's a revolving door.
Do it like kind of jury service. But so I'm not convinced by them. I'd actually like the look of the France-Austria straight forecast there. Austria under Ralph Rangnick, kind of more interesting, inspirational coach maybe than Koeman. And a real kind of core of Bundesliga players from top clubs, particularly in midfield, and I think they should be competitive.
Just looking at the list actually again, and even without Germany being in this group, there might be the most supporters for a group of any of them at the Euros. Can Austria and Poland do anything to upset the apple cart here, Mark?
Well, I definitely think Austria can. I like Lima and Sabitzer in midfield. I mean, that's pretty high level when you've got people playing for Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund in the midfield area. Rangnick, it wasn't a great time for him at Manchester United, but he was also approached by, he wasn't the only one, but a lot of people were approached by Bayern Munich, not that long ago. So he's still held in high regard, and I don't blame him for what went wrong necessarily at Manchester United. I think he's sort of, if you're looking at sort of pecking order of kind of coaches at this tournament, he's not at the very top, but he's got I think enough there to suggest that he can get the most out of Austria. They a team that have, I think, improved since he became their manager. They are missing Alaba, which is a big loss for them, but I'm looking around, I agree about the Dutch. I mean, how can you have like Ake, Van Dijk and Van de Ven in sort of essentially one position? They'll obviously get a couple of them in. And then you look elsewhere in the team and it's just not made up of the same type of quality, like in goal, for instance, that there's a problem. De Jong's not fully fit either, and Memphis Depay hasn't played a huge amount, so I'd have problems over them. So I think that Austria can definitely kind of split the big two, if you like. Poland, no, I'd be very sort of anti the Polish chances, really. I mean, they were awful in qualifying. I know that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't improve once you get to a tournament, but they scored 10 goals in what was an absolute joke of a group, and then beat Wales in the playoff without having a shot on target until the penalties. So, they're very reliant, as always, on Robert Lewandowski, and he was barely able to carry them previously, and he's not the same player that he was. So, I'm sort of, I feel like I can predict the 1, 2, 3, 4 here. I'm going to go France to finish first, Austria second, the Dutch in third, and my best bet would be Poland to finish bottom.
Okay, so Poland to finish bottom for Mark. James, what's your selection
I
for Group
thought
D?
Mark was going to reel off the goal differences there as well, and the minutes of the goal scorers for each match. But France, Austria, straight forecast there. Anti-Dutch at this tournament.
What about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, very similar. I think the fact that you've got that Red Bull continuity with Austria, that you've got Rangnick, you've got Lima, you've got Sabitzer, you've got Baumgartner. So I like the look of them. So the Marie Antoinette double of France and Austria.
Okay, just 2 more groups left to go, and we're on Group E now, which features Belgium, Ukraine, Romania and Slovakia. We'll talk about Ukraine first, Jonathan, because we've mentioned the words dark horses a couple of times already today. Could they potentially come into that category as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they did come through the Nations League route, which you've got to, that's a reasonable doubt to have.
Yeah.
But they're only behind Italy in England's group on head-to-head. I think they played pretty well in both games against England. I think Red Bull made them a pretty solid side. I like the way that they got Stepanenko and Zinchenko at the back of midfield. I think that's a good balance. I mean, Stepanenko is one of those players who I keep waiting to sort of blossom, and he hasn't quite done it, but I think he is a seriously sort of intelligent, sort of cultured player. Got Dovbuk up front from Girona, who top scorer in La Liga, so they have got goals on that side, and they've got the fact that their country is at war, which we've seen it before, that when you have a real patriotic reason to play, it does elevate you by a few percent, and that could be significant. So I think. Yeah, we saw it the last Euros, so they were pretty good, and I mean until they played England, they beat Sweden in the last 16. So they're a decent side, and I quite fancy them to get through this.
Obviously, James, Belgium lead the betting as things stand for Group E. Where are we at with this golden generation? Have they gone over the hill, or are we now a silver generation?
I think Kevin De Bruyne in the build-up to the World Cup was saying that we're all too old and past it, which was refreshingly frank, I think, and it turned out to be quite accurate. I mean, obviously it was a really poor result at the World Cup. There were fine margins. I mean, Lukaku missed some great chances in the final group game, but then Canada missed a penalty in the first game, which I remember not very fondly, as I was on Davies' first goal scorer. I think there's enough kind of fresh blood in the squad, and obviously under new manager Tedesco and the way they came through qualifying, I think they'll certainly be good enough to top this group. Longer term, I think, as I've said about sort of Italy and Netherlands, I just think there is that gulf between the top 5 and the rest, and they're not going to going to trouble them too much, I don't think. So yeah, Belgium and yeah, certainly warming to Ukraine's chances in what looks a pretty straightforward group, I think, for the top two in the betting.
Yeah, I heard an interview with a Romanian journalist this week who described Romania as distinctly average, which I thought was probably a little bit harsh going into a major tournament. But is it the same for you, Mark? Can you only see Belgium and Ukraine here?
Yeah, I think that's pretty positive. When I went through the squad, I was like, never heard of him. Like, when does he play? It looks. It doesn't look a great sort of side. I think that's fair to say. Obviously, Dragusin is the sort of most high-profile player, the most valuable player, and did well in Serie A before he got the move to the Premier League. But I'm looking at where the goals going to come from. You're looking at someone like Stanchu to maybe to do that. I'm not sure about Romania doing well at all. Slovakia, probably slightly better, but not that much in it. I think this is a really weak group, and the sort of the biggest two, if you like, I think will finish in first and second spot. Just on Belgium, they're an interesting team because I was trying to make a case for them because there was bits about them that I really liked. You've got obviously Trossard, you've got Doku, you've got Lukaku, you've got Openda up front. Bakayoko, who plays in the Eredivisie, somebody that I think will eventually move on, to even bigger things. The midfield, you've got De Bruyne, you've got Tielemans, and Nana is another player that I think is probably, without being too disrespectful to Everton, has got sort of a more. I was going to say bigger, slightly harsh.
High profile.
He'll be playing in Europe, I think, probably before long in terms of European competitions. And then you try and make a case for the defence, and it starts to hurt your eyes a little bit. And I think that they'll be found out as soon as they come up against a decent side. But I think this is a really weak group, and I'm looking for the dual full cast of Belgium and Ukraine to finish first and second in any order.
So that's Mark's suggestion. Jonathan, what would you go with here?
Exactly the same. Belgium, Ukraine to go through.
Anything different, James?
No, I like that. I mean, Belgium to win all three games around 3-1. That's one to consider. As Mark said, you do need to be looking at the big picture, and seeing kind of Witsel and Vertonghen still in the squad at the back suggests that there's certainly not a golden generation of Belgian defenders coming through anyway.
Well, last but not least, we move on to Group F, which features Portugal, Turkey, the Czech Republic and Georgia. We've already heard, Jonathan, that both James and Mark really like Portugal. Can you offer another perspective to this? Because there are some question marks hanging over them.
Yeah, there are, which is they make an awful lot of changes. It's very hard to work out what their team is going to be. Now, it might be that Roberto Martinez is doing this very consciously. I think he did it with Belgium, to be fair, that he made some slightly surprising alterations to his team. So, for instance, that Brazil game we mentioned at the World Cup in 2018, playing Lukaku on the right, that really worked. It may be that it's very calculated, but from the outside, it slightly looks like somebody who's got loads of different pieces and doesn't quite know how they fit together. I think the biggest of those pieces is Cristiano Ronaldo. And Portugal's best performance at the Euros came when he was left out for Gonçalo Ramos, and came on late on when they were already comfortably ahead and they win that game 6-1. And I'm not sure Martinez has got it in him to drop Ronaldo, and I think that's a problem because he's so static. He's obviously still a very good finisher, he's obviously still good in the air, but he makes you pretty one-dimensional. Everything's got to go around him. And I think qualifying, obviously very impressive. They only seem to qualify with 100% record. They put, 14 they put past Gibraltar? You don't win major tournaments by putting 14 past Gibraltar. Good teams can isolate Ronaldo and they can stop that. So that's my doubt about them, while acknowledging their squad is exceptional.
I was expecting to look at the squad list, and in brackets next to Ronaldo it might have said assistant manager next to it, but we'll wait and see what sort of role he has to play. In terms of the others in this group, James, like you've already mentioned, you fancy Portugal to go through. Turkey and the Czech Republic have got European Championship experience in the past, but never quite to the level, obviously, barring Euro 96 with the Czech Republic, where you'd think, they can maybe get to the latter stages.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really straightforward group for Portugal, actually. And Turkey rated second favourites. That looks about right to me. I think, the Czechs have got obviously Patrick Schick, who won the Golden Boot at the last Euros, didn't he? But they've changed their manager since qualifying, which probably isn't a very good sign. I think his last job was in charge of Lebanon, which not one of the giants of international football, but a lovely place to go actually in happier political times, I would say. But yeah, I think Turkey to finish second to Portugal in this one looks decent. I mean, they finished ahead of Croatia and Wales in quite a competitive qualifying group. They've had a few injuries in the build-up, but I think they should be good enough to finish second.
And Portugal for you as well, Mark?
Yeah, I think Portugal will win the group pretty comfortably. The problem comes later on in the tournament when they do come up against those better sides. Can they find a way to either accommodate Cristiano Ronaldo or shift him out of the team? We don't know the answer to that one. Turkey, I mean, got absolutely pumped not that long ago by Austria. They come in with that kind of, it's almost become the joke that they're sort of the dark horses, because last Euros people were talking them up and they absolutely horrendous throughout the whole campaign. This time around there's not as much noise around them, and I think that they've actually got a couple of younger players that are coming through. Goalscorer, Real Madrid, for example, and I actually quite like the coach Montella. There was a time, it was a good few years ago, but I actually felt like he might really progress into something decent, and it hasn't quite worked that way, and kind of jobs have got worse as he's gone along, which is unfortunate for him. I don't think there's much between Turkey and Czech Republic. The one thing I would say about Czech Republic is because they've changed their manager, I can't just say, well, they didn't qualify well, so therefore I don't rate them, because a manager can make a big difference. It sounded, I think 3 of the players were kicked out of the squad under the last manager. There was clearly sort of, stuff going on there that it wasn't a happy camp. Doesn't mean that a new manager can't go in there and rectify that. Georgia, I think, are, quite rightly the outsiders. I know, Jonathan, you've done a fair bit of research on them. Do you fancy them to sort of get through?
Yeah, I mean, look, they're obviously not brilliant, but I think what the FA has done over the last 7 or 8 years has been incredibly impressive. They've hosted the European Under-19, co-hosted the European Under-21 Championship. They've put loads of money into developing pitches. I think in the last decade, the number of male players has gone up by 2.5 times, the number of female players by 10 times. So I think they're doing all of that right. And what we're seeing is just the very beginnings of that work starting to pay off. So I almost feel like I want them to do well, because I think they're going about it the right way. I mean, their league is still ranked, I think, 46th in Europe, which is non-ideal. But I thought they were pretty impressive look, you've got to caveat this, they did come behind Spain and Scotland and Norway, got through from the Nations League group. They lost 7-1 to Spain. All of that has to be considered. But they were pretty impressive in those playoffs, beat Luxembourg comfortably. I know they only beat Greece on penalties, but the extra time in that game, they were totally on top. Kvaratskhelia is clearly a really good player. I think Sanyol has organised them very well. So I with 4 third-place teams qualifying, I quite fancy them as a bit of an outsider to qualify, but I wouldn't mind that. I think if you're going to go for a real outsider, I'd certainly prefer them to Albania, put it that way.
And just to conclude, that Georgia are around about 20-1 to win the group in Group F, but they will give themselves an outside chance of making the knockout stages. OK, well, that's the guys' thoughts then on the group stages, and of course we've already heard their outright considerations as well for tournament winner. But we're going to have a look now at the top goal scorer market and potential tips for that. Mbappe, not surprisingly, at the top of the market, around about 5-1. We've got Harry Kane 11-2, Cristiano Ronaldo 14-1, 18-1 Jude Bellingham, and 20-1 Romelu Lukaku. Bigger the rest. Mark, we'll start with you this time. Who stands out for you in this list?
I'm going to go for 2. One at the top of the market and then one further down at much bigger prices. Harry Kane, I think, is a very rock solid option. We know he's on the penalties. I think he is. I'm looking at that England team, a lot of creativity in there, but Bellingham's gone sort of quiet on the goal front. And I'm just looking at the team thinking, if England go well, and I think that like the way the draws worked out, you'd be very disappointed if it's not quarterfinals, semi-finals at the very least. I also think that Kane's had less of a stressful season than maybe he's had previously in terms of Premier League. There's fewer games in the Bundesliga. Bayern Munich went out early of the sort of domestic cup competition as well, and they've been out of the league for so long that hasn't really mattered that much. So he probably comes into it fresh. He was brilliant in the Bundesliga. Bayern Munich weren't very good, but I think he's a very solid option in a group that I think England can make hay. And then I'm looking for someone further down, and look, there are reasons why Marcus Thuram's not going to kind of be the top goal scorer even for France, because Kylian Mbappe's in there. I don't think it takes that much. You know, you're only asking for somebody to play well for 4 or 5 games, and that they could get a shot at big prices. And I just think he's a really quality player. I thought he's one of, in terms of sort of bargains of the season, he's definitely been one of those. Offers a huge threat up front for Inter. It's where he fits into that French team, but if he can get himself into the starting 11, it doesn't always have to be Kylian Mbappe. And I think there's so much focus on Mbappe, and you've seen sort of teams change the way that they play to try to stop Mbappe. It might just open up an opportunity for somebody else.
James, where are you looking on the goal scorer market?
Yeah, I've got 2. Again, caveat for these 2. There might be a bit of swearing at the TV if you back these guys, because they're not always the most clinical. But I think Kai Havertz and Romelu Lukaku both make a bit of each way appeal. You know, we've mentioned that, both could make hay in the group stage, particularly Lukaku, who is kind of had a solid season in Serie A, scored 7 goals in the Europa League, and absolutely rampaged through qualifying, 14 goals in 8 games. We've seen him score goals at international level for more than a decade, and so with 4 places, kind of around 16, 18 to 1. I like the look of him as an each way bet, and Havertz, who they've kind of been quite clear that he's going to have first go starting up front for Germany. His odds would have been a bit bigger when he was being tried out at left wing back, I think, in a friendly last year. But that's testament to how well he played for Arsenal in a similar role in the second half of the season. I think he scored 9 times in his last 14 in the Premier League. I was at the Emirates on the final day when he had about 10 shots against Everton. Finally managed to sneak one in, but I think he, kind of 28 to 1 or around there. He's a nice each way price as well.
Yeah, big price indeed. Jonathan, who have you been looking at?
Yeah, I mean, Kane and Havertz, I absolutely agree. I think the other one who particularly is an each way shout, I think Gonçalo Ramos, partly because Portugal's group, they could easily win all of those games 3 or 4-0.
Yeah.
Maybe him coming off the bench for Ronaldo, picking up on tired players, and maybe Martinez actually gets around to dropping Ronaldo, and we know that Ramos thrives when that happens. So, I think you only need him to get 3 or 4 goals to be in the running there. So I quite as something who's a bit of a longer price, I quite fancy him.
There's so many markets available for Euro 2024. I mean, we've just touched upon the tip of the iceberg really with outright top goal scorer and the group betting, but of the other betting markets that are out there, Mark, is there anything else that's really caught your eye?
I'll start this by saying gamble responsibly, and then get a pen and paper ready because there's loads. I do love international football. There are loads of markets. There's a lot of different options to bet on. So, in the top 10 goal scorers, I like Musiala. I'm going to disagree with the Havertz selection and go for Musiala to be the top German goal scorer. I think he's got the potential to kind of reach Bellingham sort of style numbers. Hasn't quite worked out for him yet at club level. He's like class act, but go back to the last World Cup, he hit the woodwork twice, missed a great chance against Japan. And I think Nagelsmann knows his games well from Bayern Munich. So I think he might be one of the stars of the tournament, particularly if Germany are going to go well. In the other markets, under 3.5 Romania goals. I think they'll go out in the group stage, and I think 3.5's a struggle even in a very difficult group, a very easy group, and sort of a difficult one to sort of fail to score. I think they might sort of still struggle, and I wouldn't put you off backing them to be the lowest scoring team either. I think that they are. You're playing against Belgium, playing against Ukraine and Slovakia, so that's why they're as big as they are, because they are sort of fancied to get points. But I just don't see that at all. And then 2 that are kind of pro-Portugal punts. First of all, Bruno Fernandes to be the player of the tournament. I think that that FA Cup final performance, I thought he was outstanding in that game, and he's definitely got that in him. I think, doesn't always shine for Manchester United, but it's difficult for an individual to shine when the team's just been so chaotic. But I think he has got that individual brilliance and can do the spectacular, as we've seen. He's not the most likeable of characters, but he's definitely somebody that's got the ability to be the player of the tournament. And then Portugal v France final, if they both win their groups, as I expect them to, they'll end up in other halves of the draw. And I think that might be a better way of trying to get a bit of juice out of particularly the France prices to try and see who they might get on the other side of the draw. So yeah, they're my that's a small selection of other bets that I quite like.
That's a long selection, I would have suggested. James, anything that in particular that's caught your eye?
Yeah, I love the player of the tournament market, and yeah, certainly echo what Mark says about Bruno Fernandes. I mean, I think he's created the most big chances, capital B, capital C, in the Premier League for the last 2 seasons. So that kind of demonstrates that, you know, he might be slightly let down by his teammates there. But the other two in that market, I think Harry Kane's well worth considering. If you are looking at backing England outright, Harry Kane to be player of the tournament. You know, we've seen he's so much more than just a finisher. You know, he had that season at Spurs when he had scored the most goals and racked up the most assists in the Premier League, and obviously fantastic start to life at Bayern. And Antoine Griezmann, who actually won it in 2016. I think he's the only player of the tournament at Euros who didn't play for the champions. France got beaten by Portugal in the final there, but you know, he seemed to relish that deeper role at the World Cup and had a terrific season for Atletico, and he's just such a lovely kind of technical player who have a decent record in this. You know, Zidane, Xavi, Iniesta. It's a very small sample size, but I think he could catch the eye.
It's there's been a bit of a move for Toni Kroos, who obviously you know, retires after the tournament. So if Germany go well, maybe Kroos gets that. Do you get a vote in the player of the tournament, Jonathan?
Not that I'm aware of.
Otherwise we might have been able
We'll
to.
text you who we want you to. Yeah.
I mean, if Germany do well, I think Florian Wirtz is a good shout. He's had a great season with Leverkusen. I thought he might be about to do the anti-Ballack. Yeah, Ballack in 2002 finished second in 4 competitions, but Wirtz losing the Europa League final. He can't quite do the quadruple, but he could still do a treble.
And of course, we'll be watching on from the television screen, but you'll be going, Jonathan, to Germany, and very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, off on Thursday, really looking forward to it. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to a tournament where I can just go to a normal cafe and have food in a sort of a nice, a cafe environment as I understand it. Yeah. Not the kind of intensity of Doha, but you know, a country where, it's maybe a bit easier to enjoy yourself.
Well, thanks very much to Jonathan, Mark and James for their thoughts. It promises to be an absolutely cracking summer ahead, and we'll have 8 preview shows throughout Euro 2024 for you, so make sure you join us for that. Enjoy your football, and importantly, of course, make sure you gamble responsibly.